Welcome, everybody, to English Rural's inaugural podcast. This is our first podcast, hopefully not our last podcast, but certainly our first. And we're going to be sort of publishing this during Rural Housing Week, which is the 1 week of the year that housing associations and those that support the delivery of affordable rural homes come together to celebrate the successes that we have achieved, but also to talk about what else we could be doing in terms of delivering more affordable rural homes. And over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to be exploring one of those themes, which is unlocking rural potential, addressing the affordable housing challenge. And I'm delighted to be joined by two amazing guest speakers. We've got Bella Murphy from the CLA and Roger Mortlock from CPRE, the Countryside Charity, both who have taken time out of their busy schedules on what is possibly the hottest day of 2025 so far. These speakers have much in common, both representing membership organisations with landscape, nature, environment and climate ranking highly within organisational priorities, but sitting alongside economy, community, people, and of course, housing as a central theme that runs through all of the above. I've got some official biographies, which I hope we've researched correctly. I'm just going to run through those, Bella and Roger, just to make sure people know who you are. So Bella Murphy, Director General of the Country Land and Business Association, appointed to that role in September 2024, so fairly sort of recent in the role, but having spent 2 decades in the field of environment and agricultural policy, much of that working as a senior policy role in DEFRA. And Roger Mortlock, who was appointed Chief Executive of CPRE, the Countryside Charity, in May 2023, and before that serving as Chief Executive of Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust for 10 years, and then earlier roles as Deputy Director of the Soil Association and also Director of Communications at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Hopefully that has pitched that right, and everybody now is clear who we've got joining us today. Roger, I want to kick off the conversation we're going to have today with you, and that's talking about the current landscape of rural housing more generally. And the question is, as Chief Exec of CPRE, what do you believe are the current housing pressures that are facing rural communities, and how have we ended up in such a crisis?
I think in a way I would take the two words of, I mean, if you have rural affordable housing, you can sort of take all those words and look at them separately and then together. So I think just on rural, I think, we're working with a government who is getting to be generous, is getting to grips with the challenge as what rural communities' needs are. Doesn't think naturally rurally, and I think lots of us are trying to help the government think about rural and think where that's different. But at the moment, I think we're seeing some policies that are kind of where it's clear that actually it's not their sort of natural home territory. So there's something about rural which feels to me like a challenge with this government. And it's not to say that Labour administrations haven't done some amazing stuff for the countryside. I think they have. You just have to look at the post-war Labour government. There's some great kind of, we wouldn't have national parks, we wouldn't have the Greenbelt, we wouldn't have, decent town and country planning legislation that impacted on the countryside were it not for Labour administration. So there's lots to praise. But I think the bit for me and then there's the general housing crisis that I think has a specific colour, as well as some in rural communities, as well as more general threats. So we know we've got a huge housing crisis. It's an absolute scandal that we've got so many children starting their lives in temporary accommodation. But there's a particular flavour of that, I think, in terms of what happens in rural communities, where it's often more hidden. We did some work with English Rural a few years ago about rural homelessness and the kind of the sort of hidden shame of that, where so many people are living lives on the streets. But the other thing I think is that some issues like the definition of affordable housing is a particular issue for rural communities, where that kind of mismatch between wages and average house prices in some parts of the country is huge. And also we've got those issues that I'm sure we'll come on to around things like short-term, in some parts of the country, the impact of sort of Airbnb style short-term lets are having a devastating devastating impact on some communities. So I think there's some particular things about when you put those words together, what you get. But, in general, what we're seeing is, a rise. We did a quick survey of completions. We've got a slight rise in affordable completions, but that masks the definition of affordable not working. And we've got a decrease and a kind of, I think it's 82 years. If we carry on as we are, it will take us 82 years to clear what exists already on the social waiting lists in rural communities. So there's a big crisis. Why we're there, I hope we unpick in the rest of this podcast. I think we'll find quite a few reasons.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I mean, just picking up on some of that that data, we've got a lot of data that are showing trends going on in rural communities. The National Housing Federation last year, for example, released some statistics on the affordability challenge in rural communities and found that if you looked at lower quartiles of property values, they're around 8 times the average of earnings in those areas. And there was some research that came out only a few weeks ago by ARC which looked at that need, Roger, that you were talking about, at parish level, and found that actually that need at parish level is twice that it is in urban areas. So we know that the problem is there, and the evidence is there to show that. The trends are worrying, Bella. I'm just interested. What does your membership tell you about these and other trends are impacting the crisis that we're facing?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge problem for our members, particularly when it comes to they're people who are absolutely committed to thriving communities, and the vast majority of our members have got residential housing. Many of them supply rented accommodation, and a lot of that is below market rent. And access to housing and access to affordable housing is a real brake on the ability of the rural economy to grow and to thrive. We talk as an organisation about, just in England alone, that productivity gap between rural and urban areas is about more than 40 billion pounds. And ensuring that there is access to affordable housing is a key component of unlocking some of that potential, because we've got a vast array of different businesses being run by our members, more than 250 of them, different types. And obviously they need people for those businesses to grow, and people need places to live. What's also interesting in our membership, though, is the appetite to help with that supply. But if we're talking about stats, a really powerful stat for me is that a planning survey that we've run recently with our membership demonstrated that it's taking on average nearly 11 years to get planning permission for some of the affordable housing projects that our members would like to get off the ground, and other market housing projects as well. But I think that illustrates why it's one element of the problem that we have, a planning system that is not working to get these houses through the pipeline and increase that supply.
Can I just unpick about it a little bit? Because we know that building more affordable rural homes is that boost to the economy, particularly the rural economy as well, which desperately needs that boost and is lagging behind in terms of productivity. Thinking about your members as businesses, are they telling you that it really is genuinely holding them back and we need to get these houses built?
Yeah, I found that really interesting, actually. I mean, you mentioned I've not been that long in post, and I've had a real emphasis on getting out and about and meeting people around England and Wales over the last few months. And there have been a few subjects that just keep coming up in terms of how we can support unlocking that growth potential in the rural economy. One of them that keeps coming up is skills, and another one is access to people who need places to live, and planning is another thing that comes up. So these three issues, which will work together, resolving the challenges in those areas, would help to bring about a real transformation in the rural economy, and that could create a very virtuous cycle. And at the moment it feels like we're in a bit of a stasis, where it's too difficult to get any development happening in our rural areas. And it does then mean that in a world where there are more and more alternative opportunities to do things with land, we could see a further kind of tightening of that supply, and that's not what we want to see. We want to see that unlocked so that all of these opportunities can be supported, and more people have access to that housing in the countryside.
And I want to point out that sort of planning element, because we know that there are many barriers, if you like, to delivering affordable rural homes. But two of those barriers in particular are sort of planning and land supply. And of course, the government revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework that were published last year were intended to speed up supply and help them on the mission to deliver 1.5 million homes over this Parliament. Roger, without getting distracted about the realism of that actual target, that 1.5 million, I don't want to sort of go down that rabbit hole. So without getting distracted with that, do you feel the changes from the NPPF went far enough to support the delivery of new homes in rural communities?
No, but I think also I would say that we just need to be a bit careful about, sometimes I read some of the sort of rhetoric around the housing crisis and feel that planning is the root of all evil, and it seems to me that actually planning should be the solution in this, and not, and one of the reasons why things, I guess one of the things that CPRE has fought really hard for is a robust planning system that helps balance the various needs for land and gets things in the right place. What I do see is local authorities with the guts taken out of them, no planning capacity, really struggling to deliver what they want to deliver. So I think there are some things, especially in rural affordable housing, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about mechanisms like rural exception sites, which are a great bit of a great idea, but actually, quite hard to make reality. But I think one of the things I would do is just stick up for the principle of planning. It's something we fought for, plan-led system. So I think, one of the things I think that is positive in some of the government rhetoric is, still supporting a plan-led approach. And in a sense, what we've got with some of the devolution conversations is that a sort of spatial plan at a regional level as well. And I think that kind of regional spatial planning is something that's been missing in some of our thinking, and I think that's to be praised. But I think one of the things that look, the government do, regardless of what the number is and how deliverable it is, the government are fixated on delivering 1.5 million homes, and they want to do it quickly, and there isn't enough money in the system to do that. So there's a bit of a Gordonian knot to untie in this one, because in a way the levers they've got are the existing big house builders, the sort of the top 11 or 12 people who we know, even according to the Competition and Markets Authority, have a sort of perhaps we should be looking at the influence they have on the market. So we have a very unusual housing market dominated by big players whose focus is way off what we want to see delivered in rural communities, which is often small developments on the edge of towns and villages that are delivering affordable first. That's not what the market in the world at the moment delivers. So I think one of the things I think that this was disappointing for us about the NPPF was one, a set of targets for rural communities that was not associated with need at all, that went sky high. So suddenly local authorities in the middle of nowhere with no evidence that people needed homes were given incredible targets that would change the nature of those places. For in a formula that the only fans were the big house builders. And the second thing was no focus, although we've seen some news more recently, and I think we're going to hear more about how that will be focused down on affordable housing, let alone rural affordable housing. So there's a few things to unpick there, but I think one of the things that we need, as well as looking at the planning system, we need to think about more players in the market. We need to be giving people certainty, those smaller builders, those people who have skin in the game with their communities to stick around and get it right. We need to be encouraging much more diverse builders in the market, so we don't have this weird market that we have in England where 40% of our homes are built by 11 companies. That's giving us, just getting more of that isn't going to solve the problem. We want more diversity. We want to see more investment in planning, and we want to see that that target for affordable. In a way, I think the 1.5 million is a ridiculous target, because it's, the market will do what the market does. What we need is a target for the things that are hard to deliver. We need a target for affordable housing. We need a target for making sure that brownfield sites are, revitalizing our towns and cities, because they're the things the market doesn't want to do. Let's put the government investment on the things the market doesn't want to do, rather than them pulling the levers on a market that hasn't delivered for rural communities at all.
Thank you, Roger. And Bella, I want to bring you on the planning side as well, because your members as landowners, planning policy will be something they watch very sort of keenly. And what was their response to the changes that came? And given that there have been some sort of strong hints of more changes to come, what's top of the CLA's list of asks moving forward, is particularly to make sure we get more smaller sites available in rural communities?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by echoing quite a bit of what Roger was just saying. I think what was the reaction? Really disappointment, because we were led to believe that this would be a revolution in planning, and actually it was a tinkering at the edges that continues to prioritise volume house building, and there's a place for that, right? We do need housing at scale, and of course some of that will end up on greenfield sites, but it's a missed opportunity for that kind of small and medium-sized development, medium-scale development, which is so well placed for the towns and villages around the country, where we believe that a hub and spoke model, where you have smaller hubs and then spokes that are allowed a degree of growth to support really thriving communities and keep those alive, that has to be part of the fabric of future of housing in this country. And that's the kind of thing you'll have our ancestors looking back at in 100 years and thinking, wow, that was visionary. They've really concentrated on placemaking, and I think our members have that real sense of being rooted in the places that they live, and that sense of duty to support and steward the communities that they're part of, and we want to see that unlocked. So much of what Roger's just been saying about wanting to see the conditions there that will support small and medium house builders, and make sure that they are enabled to play a really key role in the housing market, and to see more smaller developments happening in rural areas, rather than just a default to essentially urbanising chunks of the countryside. As I say, we've got to have a mix, and at the moment there is such a dominance of that, trying to unlock those major projects, that it risks leaving this opportunity to really enhance rural housing, particularly the affordable housing elements. And when it comes to how you do that, we've got some practical suggestions. So Roger's already mentioned the idea that we're really keen on, and a number of organisations in the space support, around the Rural Exception Site Planning Passport, which would essentially split your planning process down into 2 stages, and give you a light touch first stage that allows you to get permission in principle from a local authority on the basis of a project where you've engaged with the local community. You can demonstrate that need, you can demonstrate the ability to supply a need, but you can do it without all of the technical surveying and design work that a full application requires, because that is one of the things that holds landowners back. They don't want to make considerable investment in an extensive planning application if there's a high risk that will ultimately be rejected. And obviously, any way that you can de-risk that process is going to mean that people will test the water more easily. And our survey, the survey I mentioned earlier, has shown that there is a real pipeline. There's an appetite to do this, and we've got members who are managing to get through the system and do great projects, but it's in spite of the system rather than because of. And something like that planning passport could really significantly increase the volume of rural exception site projects that are coming through the system. At the moment, data suggests that the delivery under that system is going down. I'm told that between 2016 and 2023, there was a 50% reduction in the number of houses being delivered on those sites, we want to see that reversed. We want to see the volume of those projects going up, and something like the planning passport would hopefully help to unlock that appetite to do this.
How do you do that, Roger? Because you mentioned rural exception sites as well, and I feel we can actually dwell on rural exception sites because we know they have huge potential. Bella, you're also indicating that, and there was some research that was done by sort of UCL, and it looked at sort of rural local planning authorities, and around sort of only around 17% of those were delivering an exception site in a given year. So we know there's 83%, got my maths right, that aren't actually delivering one. So there is huge potential there, and having a more streamlined approach to planning policy that supports those is one way to get that forward. But Roger, thinking about the bits on the ground that need to happen as well, that community sort of support, that evidencing the need, that's that partnership, and it takes a long time. You might be able to speed it up, but how do we convince those on the ground, the parish councils, the community, the local authorities, actually this is a mechanism that can deliver at scale if they get behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned parish and town councils, because I think in a sense, if we were, we're also, what's that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and we're suffering a bit from that at the moment. And I think one of the, as well as tackling housing reform and energy, the government's also embarked on a fairly ambitious devolution program, which I think I have some concerns about how that plays out for rural communities. Rural communities often, when they're kind of bunched in with bigger places, and in a very pro-growth kind of environment, which I understand the need for that, but at the same time, rural communities can often leave out because they're a part of a picture and they're not where the main action is on the growth thing, or that's the perception. I don't think that's true. I think in that scenario where you've got governance potentially quite a long way away from where people are in rural communities, the value of town and parish councils is huge. And I've always thought, what an untapped kind of potential there is in town and parish councils. And every time I've been to see an extraordinary rural affordable housing scheme, the parish council have been at best the champions of it, and at worst very involved in kind of making it happen. It seems to me like they're a secret weapon, and I think, and it's a bit of a shame because immediately post the spending review, we found that the sort of support grant for neighbourhood planning for parish and town councils is one of the things that have been withdrawn, and I think that's a worrying sign. So I'm hoping, let's give the government the benefit of the doubt, I hope they're going to launch something more exciting to give parish and town councils new responsibilities and new jobs to do, because I think on this issue they are key to turning the debate into something that's very, very positive. I really am very supportive of the work that Bella's team has done around rural passports, and I'm picking, I think, on some of the land value stuff, which has always been tricky. So like we'll come on to that, I'm sure. But so I think, one of my kind of, real wishes is that we can unleash some of the real positive power that town and parish councils have in enabling both identification of sites, but also supporting landowners and communities to come together to kind of make sure that process through planning is a smooth one, because it has the support. I think most rural exception sites have great support amongst the communities they're serving.
Thanks, Roger. You've touched on land value, and I was going to come on to land value. So let's do that now. And Bella, through the transactional nature of planning and building homes, there will always be tension about the price paid for land and how this can deliver fairly for all of the parties involved. How do we strike that right balance, do you think, so that smaller rural sites, including rural exception sites, come forward to deliver genuinely affordable homes, but that are built at the right quality, the right design, respecting climate and environmental needs, and providing that vital infrastructure that needs to come with it? Because I know from the challenges that we face as a housing association, getting that viability can be a real sort of challenge. But I know that you have also done some work looking at what is incentivizing your members as landowners, and actually sometimes the perception around where that land value goes isn't quite quite how people perceive it to be as well. So I think there's a story there to tell. But how do we sort of square that circle around paying the right price and getting the right homes of the right quality?
Yeah, I mean, Roger's just referenced the work that we're doing at the moment, looking at the benchmark around land values for rural exception sites and basically making sure that it keeps up to date, because I mentioned before, in a world where there's demand for land for lots of different things, we need to make sure that affordable housing continues to compete. And there are other things you can do. I mean, we would advocate for things like capital gains exemptions when you sell an affordable housing site into a housing association. And that's an illustration of the way that we'd like to see those kind of sites, the tenure around those sites and the sort of long-term stewardship around those sites, something which is kind of baked in when they're created, because that then allows them to support communities in perpetuity. And indeed, lots of our members have done that. I mentioned before, there's a lot of rental housing which is run by people in our membership, and many of them will have lifetime tenants, people who will stay within a business that's associated with that land and with a house that comes with that role for a very long time. And obviously that then is kind of sewn into the fabric of that community. In terms of the land values themselves, and I guess the main point I'd make is what obviously we would continue to advocate for the freedom of choice, and we want to make sure that the incentives all stack up in a way that puts rural affordable housing firmly in the space of an attractive proposition. And we have a rural a landowner incentives task force, which is looking at the other kind of incentives that you might need to put in place where land value is not there, to tip the balance of the business case. I'd also support very much what Roger was saying about how instrumental local governance is in making these things happen, and having people who are really driving these projects. I was at the South of England show a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing some surprise giving, and there was an award-winning project, a community land trust project over in Arundel, which won an award. And it was so clear that the absolute dedication of a core team that involved people from the community and people from the local authority and the landowner working together was the reason that had got over the line. What we want to see is more of the conditions that make that possible. And that does mean that parish councils and county councils need to be properly empowered and properly funded to play their part in that process. And so, you know, that's absolutely key. We, like Roger, are concerned that devolution, if done wrong, could risk seeing more public funding channeled away from rural areas and into urban hubs. And that risks everybody losing out, because it's in everyone's interest to have a really successful, economically and environmentally healthy countryside with plenty of people living in it.
Thank you for that. You mentioned sort of the community sort of angle there. I'm going to get in trouble if I don't mention the valuable role of rural housing enablers. And I was looking for a hook to hang it on. I'm going to get it in there because certainly we know from the partnerships that we have with them up and down the country that they are quite often that sort of catalyst that bring that local governance community together to do some of that sort of groundwork to get initiatives off the ground. And of course funding is precarious, and it would be a real shame if their support didn't continue post 2026 and all of the great work that they've done, all the expectations and hopes that they've raised would disappear into nothing. I think that would be a real sort of tragedy. But Bella, you also mentioned there that sort of competing market for land, and more so I think now, you know, biodiversity net gain, whatever it may be. And I think that the way we need to look at that transaction around land does need to be within that context. And Roger, just touching on that sort of environmental side, that biodiversity side, one of the conflicts that arises when we get homes built is about sort of safeguarding the countryside and the environment. And I know that's something that your members, you know, take very seriously as well. where is the right balance that achieves that, delivers housing, and how do we get there, do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on one word that Bella mentioned just a few minutes ago, which I think is really important as well for rural communities, which is the in perpetuity thing. Because I think one of the additional calls I think I'd make is that, you know, I'd for ruling. I mean, I'm not a great fan of right to buy just across the board because you work so hard to get this stock of social housing and then it kind of can dissipate in a generation. But I would extend the restrictions further on in rural communities around resale because I just think, you know, rural communities don't function unless they've got that stock of social housing, unless people can get into those communities and live there. So I would think just before I come to biodiversity, I would say, you know, there's something about in perpetuity that, you know, Bella's bang on. You know, you know, every town and village needs to have in rural England needs to have that kind of stock that keeps a range of people living in the place, because that's what placemaking is. You know, it's not just about people who can afford to be there. But just on biodiversity, I think, you know, to be honest, I think in terms of the scale we're looking at on rural exception sites and additions to, you know, landscapes aren't set in aspic. And rural England needs to grow and develop as much as any part and I think the scale of development, it's all about getting the right scale of development done the right way. So I would say, you know, I know there's these huge markets around BNG and all the rest of it, but I think, to be honest, I would say that you know, if you're looking at, I don't know, 10, 15 houses on the edge of a village, you can probably do that in a way that kind of is completely supportive of delivering for BNG. You know, I think you need to, and I think at that scale, you can be sensitive to the surrounding environment as well, and, you know, give people. So I'm not sure that you know, that's not where our concerns around the wider environment come. I think our concerns about the wider environment come with, you know, 3,000 blocks of housing in a car dependent community of kind of identikit homes, you know, plonked at the end of or in the middle of the countryside. They're the places I think that give us the headaches around biodiversity. But I think there's some of the restrictions around delivering a good nature friendly development. You do it all the time, Martin. You know, it's like, you know, you can do it. You know, it's possible. It's probably easier to do it with a small number of homes where you've got where you're really conscious of making those connections to the countryside as well.
Yeah, and just touching on that right to buy point, Roger, as well. I mean, I think we're expecting any day the response from the government on the right to buy consultation, and certainly what I hope to see in that is a strengthening of protections more generally, not just for exception sites, but more generally for houses in rural areas, because in many communities there are only one or two left now that haven't been lost. So I think there needs to be some sort of strengthening there, and hopefully, you know, that may be where we end up. Let's see. Roger, CPR is a national charity, has a lot of influence, and the charity is very good at collaborations. One of the challenges that I feel we have talking to policymakers is the fragmented and sometimes competing voices that we have. This always reminds me, there's a saying, isn't there? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. How, in your view, do we build more consensus between those who care about the delivery of affordable rural housing, so we go far together and come together to influence in a meaningful way positive outcomes that actually deliver those affordable homes that we know that we need?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I feel passionately about is that before governments get into power, they do a really good job of joining stuff up. They go like, oh, actually, the read across between departments is crucial. We're going to get it right when we get in. And it's not a comment about this government. It's like every government I've worked with. And then when they get into power, they're sort of slightly constrained by the departmental structure of things. And, you know, you mentioned the rural housing enablers who are in DEFRA, and yet most of the push around housing is in another department. There's not much read across there. So one of the things I think, you know, as Bella's already kind of hinted at, you know, land's finite, we're trying to make the right decisions and we're trying to make communities viable on many fronts. And so I would plea, don't look at housing in terms of the solutions, don't look at housing on its own. Look at the way we build rural communities in a strong way that enables them to grow. So it's as much about making sure that there's infrastructure in the same way it is in all housing. So as well as getting the housing right, it's about making access to local services. It's about making there be functional, sustainable transport, making sure in bigger villages there's a bus service. It's about making sure that you're at, one of the really shocking bits of research in this space we did was around young people, that showed not having the right housing was the main reason for the sort of youth flight from rural communities. They didn't have anywhere to live. So I think we've got to look at this in the round. So I think that's hard to do, because I think people come with quite kind of functional interests sometimes. But I think, there's a few of us around. CLA is definitely one partner on this, where we can begin to look at those rural issues in the round and think about, we've got some big challenges to solve. How do we deliver net zero commitments? How do we create a thriving, growing economy? How do we make sure people have a great home to live in? How do we create and continue to deliver beautiful landscapes? How do we still have great food to eat delivered by our farmers? So I think all those things aren't in isolation for me. When we look at rural affordable housing, they're all tied up together, and I think we've got to be able to kind of, in a sense, look at rural affordable housing perhaps more than you would do in towns and cities, as part of that matrix of what makes rural communities thrive.
Thanks, Roger. But Bella, how do we close that gap between us, and how do we, achieve that joined-up policy approach? That I agree with Roger. I think that's absolutely what we need. How do we, as chief execs and leaders, if you like, of some of the rural organisations, bring in others and try and achieve that between us? Do you think?
We need to keep talking about what the vision is. And I think actually we're all agreed on a vision, which is a countryside that has got a steady supply of affordable housing and market rate housing, but is achieved in a really sustainable, truly sustainable way, financially, environmentally, socially sustainable way. And if we are agreed on that level of the vision, then we can work together on the components that you need to create, deliver, make happen to get there. And that's where there might be tensions in how you do it, or exactly what shape those houses might be, quite literally in some landscapes, I'm sure. But as long as we've got a shared vision, I think that's a really great place to start. And then I think it's about identifying the things that we think will help unlock that, and making the asks of government with a more unified voice. And on things like the rural exception planning passport, that's one where it does feel like there's real consensus that this could be a meaningful policy that could be implemented very easily. So come on, government, let's do that one. I think we're really interested. I was very interested just listening to you there, Roger, talking about landscapes we don't want them stuck in aspic. We do accept that they could need to evolve, and things like extending Class Q provisions to enable more development of redundant agricultural businesses in some protected landscapes is another example of the kind of practical thing that could enable that sympathetic development to continue. So finding those practical things and making the asks in a unified way of government, I think, is another really good step. And then using our networks, because ultimately, as we've all talked about, what really makes this stuff happen is what happens on the ground. It's the people in communities being empowered to do things. And we all have our networks that we can encourage to work together at local level to deliver this stuff. So if we in our organisations are having those conversations with central government to create all of the different levers and cogs and wheels that mean the system could work, then our membership are the people who will deliver that system on the ground, and we need to make sure they're working together too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bella. Well, we're going to come on to some closing remarks in a moment, but I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to talk about one brilliant thing that your organisation has been involved with over recent years, or is involved with now, which is going to help us tackle this challenge of getting more affordable rural homes built, or aiding those people that are in desperate need of housing? Whilst you think about that, I'll give an example that I'm proud of here at English Rural, and what we have done, and I think that would be mainstreaming the discussions around rural homelessness over recent years, and convening individuals, groups, academics to commission some really impactful research. And now I'm delighted when I go to meetings, either with policymakers, ministers, or with peers, and we talk about sort of housing, but we also talk about rural homelessness and as a challenge, and a challenge that actually needs addressing as part of the wider solutions being offered to homelessness. And that's something that didn't happen 3-4 years ago. So I'm really proud of the work that we have done around that in particular. Bella, what are you proud of?
I'm really proud of giving a platform to the fantastic projects that our members are doing, and making sure that other landowners right around England and Wales know about them. And we've got some really inspiring projects that our members have been involved in. I've mentioned that one in Arundel, which is local to me. When I was talking to my team ahead of this, they were telling me about a new garden village in the east of England, which has been developed with a community land trust and a volume house builder in that case. But it means that actually you've got a mixed use development with a really sizable affordable housing element, through to the much smaller things, the handful of houses that are a game changer to the village where they are built. And I think giving a platform so that people know about these projects, learn from the experience of the people who've made them happen, and all the pitfalls and the tricks that can get these things through. I think that's something that I'm very proud the CLA does and will continue to do.
Rightly so. And then Roger.
You've nicked my homelessness one, Martin, but because we did some of that together, so I'm very proud of that. But I'm also really proud of the work we've done on short-term lets. It's a gnarly old issue, but actually, when you look at the data of where the hotspots in terms of social waiting lists in around England are, they're in those places where short-term lets are also high. So you've got this another conundrum there, and I think some kind of better register of short-term lets with planning controls, so that I think it breaks the heart of all of us when we go on holiday, undoubtedly sometimes for me, to stay in a short-term let in a place, I don't know, in Cornwall or in Norfolk, and the place is killed because nobody really lives there anymore. There's just lock boxes on every door, and I think there's some of that. I get that there's people making that's a business for lots of people, and there's a balance there, but I think sometimes that balance is out of kilter, and I think we need a better system to be able to manage that balance. And the spotlight we put on that issue, been a bit controversial at times, but has been an interesting one to explore.
Thank you, Roger. And now some closing remarks. Is there anything, Bella, that you want to pull out of the conversation that we've had, just to emphasise, or anything you feel we haven't touched on today that you just want to put on the table?
I think what has struck me is how much common ground there actually is, and that none of us is saying we need to keep things as they are forevermore. Actually, there's a real appetite to tackle this issue, to support really thriving communities, and so it feels like there's a lot of material there that we've got to work with. The foundations are there. There I am starting on a housing metaphor, but the foundations are there to build something really positive. And then the other thing is just coming back to this point that in this ambition, this laudable ambition to massively expand housing provision in this country, you have to put a rural lens across that. It can't be one size fits all. You have to understand the context, the infrastructure challenges, and all of the other layers of challenge that go with rural communities that simply aren't there in an urban context. And I think if we can make sure that the solutions that we're finding really respond to those differences, we'll end up with a much better outcome at the end of it all.
Here. And then Roger.
I guess one of the things we haven't talked much about is quality. And there's this quote that is really interesting. When Nye Bevan was, I mean, it's interesting, he was Secretary of State for Housing and Health, which in itself is a kind of, mind exploding kind of idea these days. But, he said we won't be judged for the number of homes we've built, we'll be judged by their quality, in 20 years' time. And I think that's really true. And I guess one of the things, in some of the examples I've seen where they've been, fantastic English rural sites, or whether in my own village, the council has taken an amazing role building 101 new social homes across the district. Is that they're joyful, and this is like, we're not talking about, we're not talking in abstract about things, but when you get the quality right, you're about giving homes and security. When you talk to your tenants, it kind of they light up the room, because what they're talking about is they've suddenly got this mechanism to stay in the place they love, to have a life and a livelihood in the place they love, and to have one in a quality home. And I think the quality bit is so important. It's like, and that's the bit that brings the joy, and that's the thing that will make our communities thrive our rural communities thrive. And so I just, quality and joy would be the things we probably, as people wrapped up in policy, sometimes we forget that the output is about people having a better life. And I think that's something I think I would just kind of add on to the stuff we've already talked about.
You've reminded me, Roger, of one of our residents who I think you saw at a recent event that we organised, and she started off addressing the conference by sort of dangling these keys, keys, and she said, these keys changed my life. And then went on to explain exactly how they had done that. And you forget sometimes that's what it's about. It's about the people. And actually, they are the people that make the communities, that shape the landscape, that drive the economy. So it is about the people. In terms of final reflections from me, one of the things that I picked up from the conversation that we have today is actually, through that collaboration that we can form, we can find solutions that we can table to those that are shaping the environment in which we work. And one of the things that I've got a sense of, having sort of had discussions with officials and government ministers, is they do look at rural and they want to find solutions. They just don't know what those solutions are. And I think the challenge is for us to try and work together to put those solutions in front of them, so they've got the answers. So rather than asking them for the answers, we need to give them the answers, and that's, I think, a task that we all need to take away with us as well. That's all we've got time for today. We've more or less stuck to time. I want to, though, thank Roger and Bella for your inputs. Honestly, I've really enjoyed it. It's been really insightful, and I've loved having a conversation with you today. Please, if you're listening to this, then do get involved in supporting Rural Housing Week as well. There's a lot going on. If you want to find out more, look at the National Housing Federation website, or visit indeed our own website as well, to see what is going on in and around your area, celebrating the hard work that we all do to make sure that communities have affordable rural homes. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Thank you again, Roger and Bella. That's it for now.